Actually, I'm an activist for Palestine and I live in Scotland, but most people will realize that Scotland does not have control of its external affairs, but Ireland does. But it's an everlasting sadness to me that we in Scotland choose not to follow in Ireland's footsteps. When I am feeling distressed by the events, particularly in northern Gaza, I sometimes go to see a conversation held in the Irish Parliament, the Dáil, when they were interviewing an Israeli ambassador a year ago. It absolutely showed that Israel should not be awarded the exceptional position that it's in. But we must come to realities. The licenses to export weapons are controlled by the UK government. But in the city of Edinburgh, where I live, we have Leonardo that makes advanced equipment for the fighter aircraft. We have Raytheon in Fife, and we have BAE Systems in Glasgow. The Scots are brilliant at making weapons. One of my sadnesses in my lifetime, there's been a real shift away from what I think of as, well, compassionate, people-based policies. This may seem as a distraction, but I think it's relevant to what we're talking about. When the US was terrified that regimes in South America were swinging to the Cuban model of left wing, they basically committed many atrocities. In Chile, there were terrible events taking place. The UK government gifted Hawker fighter aircraft to Chile. The workers in the factory in East Kilbride refused to touch them. They invented a joke term, not non passeran, but ne passeran. I look for the workers in my own city that work at Leonardo, for the workers in Fife, basically to recognize what they are doing is taking part in an illegal act that has been mentioned by previous speakers. There's no doubt that the death of children is on their, absolutely belongs to them. We don't have that level of union support that we need. And I have to be also honest in saying something that people don't like to discuss. Remember everything that is happening in Gaza at the same time there are terrible events in the Ukraine. And what I want to talk about is this difficulty of, are you still hearing me or am I gone off sound? Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, we can hear you. It's just your video's not working. It's just your video that's not working. Thank you.
Okay. What is terrible to admit is that the Ukrainians are displaced Europeans and they're white. There's no doubt that some of the lack of support for Palestine is from deeply embedded racist views. One of the great sadnesses is about civic society in Scotland. The churches of all denominations have failed to call out Israel for the terrible harms it's doing. And the reason for this is a very basic one. The principal of my university, Edinburgh University, Balfour, and the Balfour Declaration is never discussed in Scottish schools. There is no real basis for an education on the current situation. And it is difficult to win hearts and minds of other Scots who basically think that what is happening in the Middle East is not their fault. When if anybody knows the history of the foundation of the Israeli state, it is steeped in appalling colonialism that the British have carried out. And it's very difficult to reverse that. But there are heroes in our movement. We have, on a regular basis, we read out the names of all the people involved in healthcare, whether it's ambulance drivers, surgeons, technicians, nurses. And we read out their names because they're dead. The number of names has increased extraordinarily over recent months. It's shocking, but the problem is the audience that is receiving this message is part of a long-lasting but relatively small support. We are not winning in the big arena, I'm afraid. Somehow we have to, in Scotland, mimic what is happening in Ireland. I think Ireland is the supreme example for the Scots, and we must take very forcibly. Bad things happen when good men do nothing. There are so many politicians who would come on side. We've had the recent example of a senior Israeli at highest level being invited to the Scots Parliament. It is the privilege of every MP, MSP in Scotland to invite visitors, but it is regarded as the law that they advise their colleagues who they're inviting. In this occasion, it was covert and it was about weapons. It shows at the very heart of the body politic in Scotland, we have so far to go. And all I can just end by saying, when the Americans take active soldiers into Israel and they take ballistic missile weapons, why aren't they sending in field hospitals with soldiers that will bring every damaged child to that field hospital and medevac them out if they're needed? Why is there not some heroic compassion? The answer is the United States is frozen in its pre-election stance. Nothing will happen till after the elections in the US. And that's a tragedy. Even Biden very cruelly has said, we're going to give Israel 30 days to prevent their terrible act of preventing food from going into Gaza. 30 days is beyond the election. That's how cynical the Biden administration is. So essentially what I'm saying is our hearts are broken in Scotland, but we have to try to bring a much wider section of the Scottish public on board. And as a final terrible thing to say, if you look at the churches in Scotland, they were almost mute at the time when the death camps were discovered. There was no public outrage voiced in the churches throughout Scotland. And I'm afraid we're looking at exactly the same position in Gaza, in northern Gaza now. Children are dying in their thousands, and we're doing nothing. I'll stop.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cooper.